5, the camouflage cloud. Alright, truth seekers, our first clip up to date comes to us from Instagram, and I know, but hear me out first before you discredit it and watch this clip and then tell me what you think. User the UFO God, and look, maybe it's just the name, but I'm inclined to trust them, posted this video recently, and it's been illuminating. In the video, we can see something in the clouds moving, or rather, the clouds themselves moving in a way that almost makes it seem alive. If anyone out there has seen Jordan Peele's Nope, that's the first thing that I thought to watching this clip, and mostly why I wanted to include it in this video. It brings up an interesting thing to consider. We tend to only think of UFO sightings as little black boxes zipping up through the sky, carrying passengers from another world, but what if the UFO sighting was the alien itself? You know what I mean? You follow along? An organic, non-humanoid entity capable of changing shape in ways that our little primitive human brains just couldn't comprehend. Look, I know I'm mostly summarizing the plot of Jordan Peele's brilliant Nope here, but it's an interesting thing to crunch on, and when you're watching this clip, it's hard to think of anything else. I mean, look at the way the cloud moves. It definitely doesn't look like any cloud I've ever seen. And what is there to suggest that extraterrestrial life will fit in neatly into our idea of what they should look like? I mean, we think of flying saucers just because that's what pop culture tells us, but it could be anything, really. There's also the possibility that whatever we're looking at is some incredibly advanced cloaking technology masking a craft. I mean, invisibility cloaking isn't as sci-fi as you think. Prototypes for cloaks are being developed by militaries around the world today. Let me know what you think of this footage down below in the comments, because it had me scratching my head and rubbing my chin, making all kinds of hms and ha's. And if you like what we're doing here and you want to see more UFO content and wild speculation, well, I have got some great news for you, my viewer. I've got loads of UFO videos and I've got tons of vague speculating from yours truly. All you gotta do is hit subscribe. Number 4, Area 51. Our next clip comes to us from Nevada, specifically near Groom Lake. If you're not super familiar with the geography of Nevada, and why would you be unless you're from there, if I told you that Area 51 is located right on top of Groom Lake, would that catch your attention a little bit? You know, the top secret government black site that technically doesn't exist. The infamous base said to be home to all manner of extraterrestrial activity. That's enough run up, I think. Let's check out the clip. Now, anything coming out of Area 51 is already pretty suspect. But this is really weird. In the video, we can see a series of flying lights hovering high above the desert dunes. Bright lights in the desert sky is one thing, but in the video, we see what looks like them forming together. A series of lights merges together to become one larger one flying around. So what could it possibly be? Drones flying around? Voltron? Now, drones seems like it would be the most likely answer if it was anywhere other than Area 51. I'm just saying. Whatever's happening here has to be a top secret. Could this be experiments with technology recovered from beyond the stars? Now, there are countless conspiracies surrounding Area 51, but one of the most recurring and popular ones is that it's where UFO technology is stored and reverse engineered to develop new technology and systems for the US military. Perhaps even pilots could be trained to fly alien craft. Whatever's going on here, the likelihood of us ever finding out is next to impossible. If you've seen our video on Area 51 secrets, you know that they keep everything wrapped tight as a knot down there. Nothing they don't want you to see is making it out of that base. That won't stop us from trying to get a good look. Number 3, bizarre light patterns. Now, our next sighting comes to us from the stars themselves, specifically during a live stream of the ISS, the International Space Station for the uninitiated. The stream is simple enough, a live stream view out of a porthole of the space station, offering a round-the-clock look at the stars. It's relaxing and fascinating, and I recommend you check it out. But it's also a window of opportunity into a world of unexplained phenomena. One astute viewer was watching the stream late at night when they saw something incredibly bizarre. Watch the footage, I think you'll know exactly what I mean. We can see a cluster of lights moving bizarrely across the screen in a pattern all in unison together. Now, this camera is pointed downwards towards the Earth, so some commenters have suggested that possibly what we could be seeing is intense lights shining up from the Earth herself onto the night sky. And while the realist in me can see where they're coming from here, the paranormal investigator in me is fascinated by the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this is something a little bigger than a weird light pattern. Maybe someone in the comments who knows more about lights and stars can help me out with this, but to me, this cluster of lights moving seems like it's something, man, you know? Could this be another example of extraterrestrial cloaking technology? It's far from the first time astronauts have reported seeing strange things up and around the ISS. I have to imagine the International Space Station is probably a hotspot for extraterrestrial activity. I mean, aliens coming to Earth is one thing, that's on our territory, but our big station up in the stars, That's their neighborhood. That's their backyard we put that up in. I'm sure they want to come out and see what that's all about. I wonder if aliens see it as like a funny little tourist destination to check out. Take some photos with. Who knows? Number 2. Lieutenant Gorman's UFO dogfight. Now, not much happens in North Dakota. Fargo is probably a lot more known as a Coen Brothers movie and a slept-on FX series than it is known as a town where anything of note happens. Unless, of course, you count the occasional UFO sighting. In October of 1948, Lieutenant George Gorman of the North Dakota National Guard would make history and inspire theories for decades when he claims he got into a dogfight with an alien craft. He was flying above the town of Fargo, North Dakota, when he saw what looked like an aircraft about 500 feet below him. He radioed into air traffic to try and ascertain what it was he was looking at, and was shocked to hear back from Mission Control, who told him, well, there shouldn't be any other planes in that area. Naturally, Gorman flew in to investigate. He reported that it was a tiny object, some 6 to 8 inches in diameter, blinding white and completely round, blinking on and off. He says that as he approached this strange bright object, it charged towards him. He pursued it as best he could, but when it looked as if the object was going to crash into him, it shot upwards at a 90-degree angle. He attempted to pursue it, chasing it 14,000 feet into the air, only for it to disappear inexplicably at that mark. Later that night, the air traffic control tower reported seeing that exact same bizarre light at the airfield. Gorman touched down and told his superior officers that he had no idea what it was he encountered, but that he had reason to believe that whatever he was pursuing had thought behind its movements, that it seemed to be making decisions, conscientious choices, and it was reacting to what he was doing. Lieutenant Gorman would live out the rest of his days fairly normally, but no doubt in the back of his mind, he must have always wondered just what it was he encountered that fateful night. Number 1. Tic Tac sighting. If you're a UFO enthusiast, you probably already knew about this, but I'll never stop banging on about this because it's the craziest thing that's happened in years. The Pentagon publicly revealed that they've been tracking UFO development for years, putting some serious weight into the UFO discussion. Besides doing more to legitimize UFO discussion than anything else, like ever, it also provided us with a bevy of sightings from government agents to pull from. In 2004, a pair of Navy pilots tracked a series of UFOs for weeks on end. According to their reports, these objects would appear suddenly at about 80,000 feet in the air and then descend rapidly towards the Pacific Ocean, eventually stopping at around 20,000 feet and just hovering. They would either drop out of radar range or shoot right back up into the sky, which is pretty bizarre behavior. These entities were monitored for weeks before 2 fighter jet pilots were officially sent in to investigate the phenomena. Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slight, who flew out to try and get eyes on it. What they found would confound the veterans. The men reported back that the object resembled a giant Tic Tac, an unidentifiable white-colored oval-like aircraft about 40 feet long. Far, far too big to be a drone, and doesn't really sound like any aircraft I've ever heard of. The craft was jumping around erratically, staying just out of reach of radars, but not moving in any one particular direction. The pilots agreed on a rendezvous point to touch down and discuss whatever it was they had just seen, but as they were heading towards it, the UFO flew towards their rendezvous point at a breakneck speed before disappearing entirely. Commander David Fravor said it was unlike anything he had ever seen before, and the whole experience had weirded him out. Completely understandable. I think if I ever saw a giant Tic Tac spiraling erratically through the air, it would kind of affect me too. So what do you think? Any ideas at all? Because that sounds like pretty hard proof of a UFO.
Number 5 on this list is danger. Maybe this number on the list would be better titled risk versus reward, honestly, because that's basically what it boils down to. Space travel is by far the most dangerous form of travel that we have. Like, everyone has heard someone tell them before that whenever you get in a car, you are taking a risk, which is true. You could get in a car accident at any point in time, but a lot of times those car accidents result in little fender benders, and for the most part, nothing major. If your space shuttle breaks down though, like even if a tiny little thing goes wrong, then that is very likely the end of your entire existence. And obviously, we've seen this happen before. Several space shuttles have exploded or malfunctioned, and astronauts have in fact died because of it. There's always going to be an immense danger when someone steps into a space shuttle, and they're going to be risking their lives. Now, if the reward was incredible, then it might be worth it, but as we're going to talk about later in this video, the reward reward might not be that great. Like, at the end of the day, I truly don't think that I would be willing to go to space. I have the utmost respect for those who do decide to do it, but I just don't know if it's for me. The danger is just a bit too high. Number 4 on this list is aliens. Aliens, although unlikely, need to be considered when determining whether or not to go to space or not. If there is a risk that we could run into aliens and in the process of doing so, piss those aliens off, then that would really not be very good for any of us. There have been tons of stories about aliens and the possibility of them being out in the universe at this point. In fact, I think it's pretty much an accepted belief that if the universe is infinite, then there has to be life somewhere else in the universe. But it could be closer than you think. One famous story is that of the knock. Tanya Sirohi writes, "First off, there's no sound in space. There's only vacuum. And this is precisely what makes this story a strange one. Back in 2003, astronaut Yang Liwei, the first to be sent into space by the Chinese space program, was sitting in his space shuttle when he reportedly heard a knock. He described it as someone knocking the body of the spaceship, just as knocking an iron bucket with a wooden hammer would sound. Apparently, he's not the only one to have experienced this. There were other Chinese astronauts between 2005 and 2008 who've reported hearing similar sounds. A lot of people have heard this story and credited it to being aliens. A lot of people have heard this story and credited it to being aliens that caused the sound. If that's the case, then it's something NASA really needs to consider if they ever want to go to space again. Number 3 on this list is space snakes. Now, I'm gonna be honest, guys, this one is just kind of silly, but I honestly just wanted to throw it in here because it really does make for a good story. And let's face it, if this story is actually true and it's all real, then I also would think twice about making another mission to space as well. Tanya Sirohi says, retired NASA astronaut Dr. Story Musgrave has a lot to his credit. So it would be difficult to pass this off as a lie, but he claims he saw an 8-foot-long white snake floating through space. It's not hard to imagine that this could have been a hose detached from the spaceship, but Musgrave, he remains adamant. So once again, folks, I want to reiterate that this is a bit of a silly entry, but if we suspend our disbelief for just 1 second, then it gets pretty terrifying pretty quickly. If there is actually just a bunch of giant white snakes floating through space, then I don't know if there's actually a large enough sum of money that you could pay me to go and fly into that. Also, who knows what these things would even be capable of? Maybe they're super smart and we just have no idea. I, for one, do not want to be the person having to find that out. Number 2 on this list is Elon Musk. So I entitled this entry Elon Musk, but ultimately it's just billionaires in general at this point. For some reason, it's not enough for these guys with billions of dollars to just own some fancy cars and yachts. No, they need to have their own fancy rocket ships as well. And they've made it their mission to fly to space in some capacity and do it before all of the other billionaires do it. Well, guess what? This is good news for NASA. SpaceX was founded in 2002 by Elon Musk. Google says Space Exploration Technologies Corp. is an American spacecraft manufacturer, space launch provider, and a satellite communications corporation headquartered in Hawthorne, California. It was founded in 2002 by Elon Musk with the goal of reducing space transportation costs to enable the colonization of Mars. NASA is probably loving the sound of that last bit there. Reducing space transportation costs? At the end of the day, NASA's whole mission isn't to worry about costs and other things. It's research. They want to research space and learn more about it. If I'm NASA, then I'm looking over at Elon Musk and thinking that this guy might be a really nice guy to get close to. Let Elon Musk do all the work and fit the bill of going to space, and you can tag along for the ride and complete your mission of researching stuff along the way. If someone else is going to do all the legwork for me, then it honestly just makes sense that I sit back and strap in for the ride. Billionaires, for whatever reason, have decided that they want to take the reins on this one, and I think NASA is happy to let them. And number 1 on this list is money. Even NASA, one of the richest organizations in the world and a group that is tackling problems such as space travel, runs into money problems. At the end of the day, our society is built on the back of the mighty dollar, and if you don't have enough of said dollars, then you're not going to be able to do what you want to do. Every time NASA launches a space shuttle to go into space, literally every single time, that is going to cost $450 million. That's just one space shuttle going on one single mission. Now, $450 million is a lot of money, but to a big corporation, that could be considered chump change if you think about it. McDonald's, for instance, is thought to spend over $1 billion every year on advertising in the United States alone. That's just on advertising, let alone all the money they spend on the actual product and labor and transportation and everything that goes into making their business run. However, McDonald's makes a lot of money off of those advertisements. They pump the money into silly commercials and we pump our money into poorly made burgers. This sort of business model doesn't really translate to space travel though. At the end of the day, $450 million is nothing if that $450 million is being spent on an operation that could bring in $1 billion, let's say. But in this case, that $450 million isn't being spent on that. That money is being spent and then they aren't getting any of it back. There aren't any McDonald's in space and there isn't any willing customers to spend money on stuff up there. In fact, there really isn't anything there at all. Throughout history, people go where the money is. Usually, it doesn't even matter how dangerous things are. Mining for oil or coal was extremely dangerous back in the early days, but there was a lot of money in it and therefore people did it. There just simply is not a lot of money currently to be found in space. If, for instance, someone discovered a rare and valuable mineral or rock that's sitting on the moon and it was something that people would pay lots of money for, then I guarantee NASA would be up and running and sending tons of space shuttles to the moon. I think maybe the thing that's so unsettling about this is that we could be missing out on tons of human progress, but money is holding us back. Like maybe there are some really important things to be learned in space that we could be learning about right now if money wasn't a factor. Hopefully somebody is ready to fork over the big bucks soon and we can get some people back up in the air.
Number 5, the Allagash abduction. Our first tale is known as the Allagash abduction. And by the way, what a turn of a phrase. That sounds like a great airplane book. Named after the Allagash waterway in Maine where it took place. In 1976, a group of 4 friends who'd all met in college were taking a trip camping, canoeing, and relaxing. The trip would be a trip they would never forget, and not just because of the salmon. The men, twin brothers Jack and Jim, and friends Chuck and Charlie, all decided to go out fishing on the lake at night. Before setting off, though, they made sure to light a large campfire to act as a visible landmark from the water. Now, the evening transpired fairly normally, fishing, sharing stories, until the men saw a blinding light in the sky above them. A glowing orb that shone brighter than any light any of the men had ever seen, flashing all sorts of bright, radiant colors. Now, the object was hard to make out, but it looked to be about 80 meters in diameter, and was slowly approaching the fishing boat. The men hurriedly panicked and paddled back to the shoreline, only to discover that the campfire they had been lit had been completely smoldered and looked to have been put out hours and hours ago, despite the men having not been out nearly that long. Stranger still, a few days after the trip, the men all started reporting similar nightmares, seeing a silver operating room and long, tall, giant-headed creatures examining them in this room, taking samples of their blood, their skin, and so on. All of them described the room, the creatures, and the nightmares extremely similarly. The men underwent psychiatric evaluation and were all deemed mentally stable, even passing polygraph tests. So what happened? Could this have been a mass hallucination? Or were these men plucked by visitors from another world for study? And if you love UFO stories and alien abduction stories, we've got plenty more where that came from at Top 5 Scary. So toss a subscribe and keep on creeping on. Number 4, the mysterious man. Our next story comes to us from the internet's campfire, Reddit. A thread was posted asking abductees, or people who've got an abduction story to share their experience. Now the whole thing is really a highlight, but this one stood out for me. Take a listen, because this anonymous Redditor shared a truly unforgettable, strange experience. He was living in Washington at the time, and he and his friends were really big stargazers. One Thanksgiving, he got invited to stay with his friend's family. So they all went out to go do some stargazing, went out to a big field of knee-high grass, and were staring up at what they thought was a bunch of shooting stars. The original poster asked his friend what the light was, but he said he had no idea. The light was bobbing around, bouncing wildly in the sky like a pinball. Then all of a sudden, it fizzled out. Puzzled, but not disturbed, the friends continued on with their night, walking through the field, wondering what they'd seen, even joking that maybe it was a UFO, but assuming it must have been a drone or something. And then it gets weird. They came across a young man standing alone in the field. They were the only people there for miles around, and the poster said he would have been able to see him from where he was. So he said it was almost as if he appeared in front of them. He was wearing only ratty jeans and nothing else. It was the middle of November, so the attire was particularly odd. Now the friends were scared to approach him, but OP felt necessary to go forward. He said he didn't sound drunk, but that he did seem visibly stirred. He asked the strange man what had happened, and he said he did not want to talk about it, but he needed to be examined at a hospital immediately. The Redditor gave the man his jacket and saw him into an ambulance, where he was then taken off to a hospital. What happened? Was this man an abductee who'd been dropped off? Was the light they saw flooding around him being beamed down? We may never know. Number 3. The 1979 Spain sighting. Another Reddit thread asking a similar question asked users to share their stories of famous UFO and alien sightings from their country, bringing us this story from Spain that took place in November 1979. A plane took off from Mallorca, coming from Austria and heading to Tenerife. Not long after, it found red lights in the sky hovering ahead of it. Now, initially the pilots assumed it was just another plane. The flight crew tried to signal over the radio to find out what was on their flight path, but neither the air traffic controller in Barcelona nor the military radar had any idea what it was they had encountered, as nothing else should have been sharing the airspace with them at this time. The plane ascended, hoping to avoid the flight path of the UFO and to try and get a look to ascertain just what they were flying up with. The UFO kept getting closer and closer, so the pilots did an emergency landing in Valencia. The UFO had a similar idea and followed them around till it landed. The original plane's radar started to pick up 3 objects flying behind them. The military had sent out 2 planes to try and assess and contain the situation. They found a giant red light floating statically over the airport, even though it wasn't being picked up on by the radar. The light started to fly when they got closer as they attempted to chase it, soaring around, tailing the mysterious floating light for upwards of 2 hours, intermittently losing sight of the target completely, occasionally getting blips on the radar, until eventually the trail went cold, and as quickly as it had appeared, the strange light had disappeared. People on the ground reported seeing that light all over that day, and to date, no one truly knows what had happened. Number 2. The Travis Walton Incident. Now, our next story is a wild one even by top 5 standards, but that's exactly why I wanted to include it. Our story starts in November 1975, and I'm pretty sure that's the 3rd one of these that took place in November. It's a weird month for aliens, huh? Travis Walton was working as a forester, and the day was passing normally. Walton and his co-workers from the logging crew were riding in a truck, 7 men total, when they encountered a flying saucer-like object hovering above them around 100 feet in the air, making a loud, high-pitched droning noise. The truck stopped, and Walton left the vehicle to get a closer look at the unidentified flying object. And suddenly, a bright light surrounded the truck and knocked Walton back and unconscious. Terrified, the other men drove off. Walton then goes on to claim that when he awoke, he was no longer in the forest on the ground, but was in a bright, silvery, hospital-like room being observed by 3 short, bald creatures, very similar to the Allagash abduction story. He says that he struggled as much as he could against his captors until he was met with a tall creature that closely resembled a human, but was wearing an intimidating helmet. The masked creature escorted Walton to another room and put a translucent mask over his face, and he blacked out. Walton says the next thing he can accurately remember is walking alongside a highway 5 days later. The thing is, Walton really was missing for 5 days. There was a search. Scent dogs and helicopters were used to track him over the woods, and he was assumed to have passed. For 5 full days, he was completely untraceable until one day he just reappeared. Since that fateful week in 1975, Travis has sworn that what happened to him was an abduction, even if it just seemed like a bad dream. His story served as the basis for the 90s horror film Fire Fell from the Sky, so if you're looking for a dramatization of this story, good one to check out. And number 1, the Rendlesham Incident. It's sometimes referred to as Great Britain's Roswell. The Rendlesham Incident is a very noticeable case in UFO sighting history. On December 26, 1980, there was a series of vivid, bright flashing lights flying over Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, England. 2 US Army personnel, John Burroughs and Jim Penniston, were stationed at local Air Force bases and were alerted by these strange lights, worrying that it could have been a threat. The younger of the 2 men, Mr. Burroughs, said that the lights looked like a beacon flashing all sorts of colors. Over 40 personnel stationed at the Air Force base corroborated this claim. The 2 men got clearance to investigate whatever was flashing over Rendlesham Forest. In their official document to their superiors, the 2 men write that they saw a strange, glowing, metallic triangular object hanging in the sky, pulsing with colored lights. Neither of the men had any idea what it was they were witnessing. The craft seemed far more advanced than anything either of them had ever seen, and seemed not of this world. As if that wasn't compelling evidence enough, neighboring farm animals were all in a frenzy as this thing was flying, and the airmen's equipment started malfunctioning. The personnel could no longer use their radio to contact the base. Landing in the middle of the clearing in the forest was a craft unlike either of them had ever seen. It was black, triangular, and made out of smooth, opaque glass. No windows or landing gear. It didn't look like anything either of these trained servicemen had ever seen. Penniston describes there being hieroglyphic-like symbols etched onto the shell of the vessel, although they were far too cryptic for him to understand. The craft took off, changing the lives of those men together. And it wouldn't even be the last sighting of the Rendlesham UFO, because not even 2 days later, the same strange lights were seen flying overhead the forest again. This time, coming prepared, crews set out with Geiger counters to follow up on whatever was flying around them. The patrol found their way to the landing site Penniston and Burroughs had described and found several depressions in the ground, all setting off the Geiger counter for radioactivity. And lo and behold, above them was those same flashing lights that had been taunting them 2 nights before, disappearing into the skies. 40 years later, and we're still no closer to understanding what happened in the Rendlesham incident.